Weren't the Gospels written 60 plus years after Jesus ascended? How can we know that they were reliable in detail? For example, precise wording of Jesus' sermons, miracles, etc.
Yes, great question. So the Gospels, well, depending on how you look at it, you might say they could have been written as soon as 20 to 30, as long as 60. They don't come with a date. The key thing is they're written within the first century, which is really important because it is a time when the contemporaries of Jesus would have still been alive, eyewitnesses would have still been around, not a couple of hundred years later, as the biographies of some other religious figures are written with a much, much bigger gap. But let's say, let's take it that it is a longer period of several decades. What about the details? Well, there's a few things I guess we could say there. Firstly, the kind of events that the Gospels are recording are not the kind of things you forget easily. I mean, I do forget like what I had for dinner last Wednesday. I didn't forget what I had, on the first date when I went out with my now wife, because it was more memorable, okay? Apologies to the people I went out for dinner with last Wednesday. So some things are memorable. Jesus' teaching, by the way, was teaching that was done in a very memorable way. So it was simple. There were stories. It was the kind of stuff that is easy to retell decades later. Also, in an oral culture where you couldn't Google everything, it was a lot easier. In fact, many cultures today are much, much better at remembering things than we are. And one of the problems of our phones is actually it's causing us to lose our ability to remember stuff in that way. And also bear in mind that the Christian faith is based on this claim of the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. We can debate about the details of odd words here or there or things like that, but let's ask the question, that's a pretty major thing, isn't it? It's not the kind of thing like 30 years later, like, did Jesus rise from the dead? Was the tomb empty? I just can't remember. Just can't remember what happened on that Sunday morning. It's not the kind of thing you forget. The other thing I'd also say, the gospel accounts are generally written later than the letters that come, confusingly, after the Gospels in the New Testament documents as we have them in the Bible today. 1 Corinthians 15, which Niv quoted from at lunchtime, is from a letter that was written before any of the Gospels. And that is actually one of the central texts that we could go to when it comes to the evidence for the resurrection. Written just maybe a couple of decades at most after the event, quoting a tradition that goes back to within a couple of years of the event, most scholars would say. So actually, when we're talking about the claim of the resurrection, we're not talking about something that was first written down much, much later, something that was already being circulated from an early stage.